So, Wilma, you are my second cousin once removed.
Yeah,
My mother's first cousin.
yes.
And I would like you to talk a little bit about what your earliest recollections are of growing up in Czechoslovakia, what your life was like,
Yeah.
what your day-to-day routine was like,
Do you want me to start from when I was a baby?
from your earliest memories.
Okay. Well, I once, my father went to see a doctor. I was 1 year old, and the doctor had a watch that was hanging on his vest, and he was sort of dangling it in front of me and said in German, "You little girl, tell me what time it is." And I said, Punkt eins, which means exactly 1 o'clock. And it happened to be 1 o'clock. And that's all I knew how to say. And that started my reputation as a genius. 1 year old. And well, I remember exactly what our house was like. I remember that we used to go by coach into town, which was 5 kilometers, but it took, God, a long time. I remember that the most best strawberries in the world grew behind our house. I've never eaten any as good as that. I had a lot of trouble with my mother. She didn't approve of a lot of things about me when I was little. I used to crawl into the dog's hut because I felt the dog is the one that isn't complaining about me, everybody else was. And I remember when my sister was born, which is when I was not quite 2 years old, and I wanted to see, are these too many trivial things? They told me that the stork had bitten my mother in the leg, and I kept wanting to see where he had bit her, and nobody showed me. So, and well, we used to go into town being Horshowski Teen or Bishop Deinitz, which was about 3,000 persons, and we used to go there, every week to visit my grandfather, and then a horrible thing happened. My grandfather died of cancer, and so we moved into their house in town, and that's where we stayed until we had to emigrate. And I remember, of course, a lot about that time. I was 4 years old at that time, and at 6 I started going to school. It was because the schools were state Catholics, state schools, but actually there was Catholic prayer every morning. I still know it in my heart. And we were excused from the religious instruction, and our instruction was by Mr. Zwetschgenbaum, who taught us on Thursdays. That was when we didn't have any other schools. And our language was German. I understood a few Czech words, but not much. And the political situation at that time became such that it was a good idea for Jews to become Czech-speaking, because my parents knew how to speak Czech. Incidentally, my mother did too, despite the fact that she was born and raised in Bavaria, but her parents were, thank goodness, Bohemian Jews. And I was sent to a Czech high school, and I was given language instructions to learn Czech. And after a year, I knew enough to pass the examination into the gymnasium, which was a long distance away, I think about 10 kilometers. And so I commuted there by train every morning and got back mid-afternoon or even late afternoon. Well, and I could tell you about what the school was like. I never had a Jewish fellow student in any class, never, not in the gymnasium, not in the high school, of course. There were a few Jewish kids, but they happened to be in other grades. So in some cases, I knew who they were. Incidentally, the last name of one of them was Franta Clemens, and Clemens meant originally it was Cohen. It was, in my opinion, it was pretty stupid that a lot of Jews changed their names, but they changed them in such a way that everybody knew that their name was what it had been before, namely Cohen. Anyway, so no, I didn't have any. That's a long answer to a short question. I didn't have any Jewish friends. Of course, there were Jewish kids in town, but somehow they weren't usually my type, or they were a year or two younger. So Greta Schleissler was, oh God, 3 or 4 years younger, so that was beneath me to associate with anybody that young. And one Jewish girl had a bad reputation. Shall I tell you something funny, which maybe you don't want to hear?
Tell us, please.
Well, this Liesl Geschmei, she was the daughter of a local Jew who was not a member of the congregation. He was all veterinary, and Mary Ann, my sister, always tried to tell people interesting things, that they wouldn't know. So she said to Mr. Zwetschgenbaum, she said, Mr. Zwetschgenbaum, Liesl was in a ditch with Willie, and what they did, you couldn't even imagine.
What were your summers like?
Well, we never traveled. I mean, in winter we went to Dunwall to visit Aunt Olga, my father's sister, with her family, but the travel was out. My father, whose opinion counted to everybody, was that it is the nicest here, why do we want to go anywhere else? We also never went to any restaurant because, our food is obviously better than anybody else's. And so, during summer, what happened was that the city relatives came to our place. And my father was very proud of my mother's cooking, and I don't think anybody thought of the fact that it actually was an awful lot of work, long summers, vacations were 8 weeks, everybody was lots of people around the table. I should say, as far as traveling was concerned, it was sort of fashionable for people who could afford it to go to Italy. And so Aunt Leo's wife, Aunt Ida, went with the 2 children, and Aunt Martha went with the 2 children, but my mother didn't go with us because we're healthy and we don't need it. So, we never traveled.
And so in your later teen years, what can you tell us about that? And what was the political situation? Could you sense anything coming?
Well, no, I actually not. It all started in the very late 30s, just really during the last year. I mean, maybe the fact that we all switched to the Czech language was a sign that, in the Czechoslovak Republic, you're not supposed to be speaking German. So, but of course, that was just in school. and in town, we spoke German with everybody else. And it was, well, we, there were worries elsewhere, for instance in Vienna. So there was a distant relative in Vienna whose son, by the name of Hans Stein, wanted to learn agriculture and go to Palestine. So Uncle Leo accepted this son named Hans Stein, and he was sort of what was called an adjunct. That was somebody who works on the farm without getting any money, just learning. And Hans became a good friend of mine, but his plan was to prepare for Palestine. I mean, he was an early Zionist. And that was, and then another Prague Jew also asked us, and he also came to work for us. He worked for my father, and but we really didn't take the whole thing too seriously. I learned from Mr. Zwischenbaum about Zionism. In fact, he had two projects with me. He wanted me to become religious, and he was hoping that I would become a Zionist. Well, I had a lot of sympathy for Zionism, not so much for religion. So we were aware of, of some people trying to go to Palestine, because Israel was not used, the word wasn't used in that connection. And but people started to behave in awful ways. My father had hired a gardener who had planted apple trees all over the edges of all the fields, apple trees. And one day, 40 apple trees were broken off, and it obviously, somehow everybody was convinced that it actually had been the gardener who did it, and then some swastikas were painted on our garden wall, so things like that were happening. But then we got a visitor from an old friend named Emil Lederer. Does anybody remember his name?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he was a very interesting guy. He not only was he an artist, he painted, and he was a sculptor, but he realized that to make a living was in farming, especially if you wanted to go to Palestine. So he learned, again, he was at Uncle Leo's rather than at our place. And he had done various things. He had been growing mushrooms in the fortress of Theresienstadt, Terezin, which a lot of people don't know, which then became a concentration camp under the Nazis. And once he came and he said that he has a good friend named Schmidt, who was a social democrat, who is moving to Nova Scotia, and that's the place to go. So, none of us wanted to really leave too much. Things were fine the way they are, but ultimately he persuaded us to go and look at Canada. And so my father went with Karl Schleisner, who I can tell you how they are related. Everybody was related. And they went to Canada, and they liked it very much. And the anti-Semitic people in Ottawa had never seen a Jew like my father. Couldn't quite believe that a Jew could be a farmer. That's not the way they pictured him. but they thought he was special, and so they actually gave him pretty good conditions to go. The problem was that to go to Canada, one had to have $1,000 per family, which is not much to start a farm. But my father then got together people who had money abroad, which was illegal in Czechoslovakia to have what they call hard currency. But my father picked people, local people, who we thought that they would be good, including Pepe Clement, who was not a farmer at all, but my father felt he'll fit in anywhere. But my father was very nostalgic about home. He didn't want to leave, and he said, "It's Canada, that's so far, oh gosh." So they decided that there was another possibility, and they heard France is not bad. So he and his cousin Walter went to France together, and they were well received. They got a rent. They were offered a rental of a farm for, under very good conditions. He didn't have any cash, but that was okay. And we say that he also liked the wine there, but because although he was used to beer, we were very much used to beer, and so he came back, and the whole group got together in our living room. And he told them about the greatness of France, and his argument was that once this business with Hitler is over, in 1 hour we're back home again. Well, but at that time, I must say he ran the show as far as the group was concerned, but at that time he was outvoted, and the decision was Canada. But there were problems too. First of all, somehow everybody was convinced that things were more dangerous for my father than for anybody else. So taking a train, or even the rest of us taking a train through Germany, that was out of the question. So we had to fly, and some people had enough money to pay for everybody else, and when they had the $1,000 for everybody except the letterers, and the story goes, I still don't know if that's true, that I sat down on my suitcase and said, "Without the letterers, I'm not going." So they found the money, and we flew to Brussels, and from Brussels we went to Antwerp, and then from Antwerp.
Can I back you up, Mama?
What?
Can I back you up, Mama? Could you start with the news about Munich and your reaction to Munich, and who came to?
Oh, yeah. Well,
I'm sorry. I hope you don't.
No, that's fine. No, that's
yeah.
good.
That's going back quite a bit. I'm sorry. There's a very important thing. How did we leave town? One night, and nobody remembers which night, about the middle of September, Joe Levitt, who was in the army at the time, threw some pebbles at our window at 4 o'clock in the morning and told us we better get out, the Germans are up to no good today. So we packed everything on the car, and the car wasn't very big, that we could, and left town. Our maid was standing at the door, and asked, "When are you coming back?" We had no answer to that, and we went to the center of Bohemia. We were living at the Western German border, and we went to my cousin, my father's cousin Walter, who had a rented farm there, and there, when we arrived there, relatives from all over the border areas were coming that day or the next few days. They all came there, and I remember I slept at their house on 2 soft chairs that were pushed together, that, you know, and yeah, we were there for a few weeks, and after that we went to Prague, and we stayed at the empty apartment of my father's uncle Siegfried, who was a doctor, and he had died, so we were there until it was time to leave. And yeah, and then came the flight to Brussels.
And who arranged all that, and the flights, and how did that come about?
Look, I think my father did most of it really, and
And so then you went from Brussels, you know,
to Antwerp. I even have a picture of us walking
Yes.
in the street in Antwerp, all nicely dressed, not looking like you picture refugees are supposed to look like. And then came the terrible boat trip on the boat. The boat was called the Duchess of Ethel, and it was called, rightly, one of the rolling duchesses. I think we were all sick the whole time. Strangely, the 2 little girls who were alone were not sick, but everybody else was miserable.
Who were those 2 little girls?
The 2 little girls one was Doris, you remember her, and I remember her saying to her mother, "I can't sleep when you're vomiting all the time." And the other little girl was Eva Lustig. And I could tell a sad story about the Lustigs later on. When we got to Canada, my father sort of divided people up into usually 2 families or 2 or 3 families together, depending on what the housing was like and so on. Very often it was one man who knew farming and another one who didn't. Like Alex Lustig was a lawyer. And so, yeah, and I remember my first impressions of the farm. The farm we were on was called the Van Sickle Farm. And Mr. and Mrs. Van Sickle stayed there for a while, sort of to teach us the ropes. And I remember in the morning, we had a breakfast like we never had before, like scrambled eggs and bacon. In Czechoslovakia, you didn't know that kind of bacon. And lots of stewed fruit at the table at the same time, and jam that they had made and so on. So we thought the time on the Van Sickle farm was very, very nice.
Can you talk a little bit about, was there someone that came to verify that you were farmers before you left? Like from the CPR or somebody to?
Yeah, there was a Mr. Colley, and he tried to be quite bossy and tell us what we could or could not do, but he had a son who was really a good for nothing. They didn't know what to do with him. He couldn't, so he stayed with us, and he learned. He was supposed to learn farming from my father, and he stayed for a while. And do you know about the book that was written called "None is Too Many"?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I guess everybody knows that. So.
But did your father ever meet W.C. Blair? Do you know that?
Any what?
Did your father ever meet Mr. Blair from the government?
No, but we knew about Mr. Blair, and My father, I probably talked too much
No,
about
not
my
at all.
father, but he made all kinds of connections. For instance, he got to know Mr. Bray, who owned chick hatcheries all over Canada, and he and his wife decided to let me stay with them so I could go to Central High School, which doesn't exist anymore, I think. So I went to high school, and all I had to do there was supposedly teach the kids French, but the kids weren't interested in French, so I had to help a little bit when the maid was off on the weekend. But, you know, I had a good time with the Brays, and after a few months, they thought I should become more Canadianized. So they paid for me to live in what they call in residence. In America, we call it in dormitory. So I stayed at McMaster.
But could I interrupt you, Mama? Could you explain how you came to go to McMaster? I think it's a great
Yeah.
story. How it is that they admitted you to McMaster, and then your sister as well.
Well, that's a lot of bragging.
That's okay.
We're happy to hear it.
No, they thought that, you know, I was doing awfully well. They gave me entrance examinations, and there was no problem with that, so they accepted me. And then Marianne wanted to go too, and so they asked her, "Are you her sister or her cousin?" And she said sister, so I said, "So we take you too." So, yeah, well, you know, I must say we had learned, I hope you Canadians are not offended, but we had to learn a lot of languages, you know, like in my gymnasium, first year, of course, was Czech and German, third year, and then every year through always was Latin, and then 2 years later was French, and you know, you continue all the other languages at the same time. And it was only in the 7th year, well, which was really my 5th year, that I only had 2 weeks of Russian, because then we ran away and I never had more Russians than that.
Can I ask you a question? How did you learn English once you were in Canada?
It came automatically. People asked, you know, how come you don't have an accent? Well, I never did. But you know, one funny thing is, in this past year or two, people have sometimes asked, "You have an accent, don't you?" But that was 85 years ago, or is it more than that? No. English came very easy. By the way, my mother knew a little.
So I have a question. How did Arnold Schmoker end up in that group?
Well,
Because he was not Jewish.
Yeah, there were 2 people who were not Jewish in the group. One was Arnold, and the other was Yara, the wife
Oh, yeah,
of my father's cousin Hugo, who was Czech Catholic, but not very religious either, or she wouldn't have married Hugo. Yeah, well, yeah, how did
Arnold Schmoker end up? And really,
yeah,
if you know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you did touch on it lightly too, because Dad
Yeah.
really wasn't related to anybody either.
Yeah, we had Simmental cattle, and my father went to Switzerland to look for an expert for Simmental cattle, and there was the Schmoker family who were running people's farms for other people, and they had, I think, 3 sons.
That's right.
And so Arnold was willing to come with us, and yeah, and then after he was in Canada for a while, he brought his parents over, and I think among the pictures I have, are his parents. And, yeah.
Okay, so now you're here. How did you meet your husband, George?
Well, we were, after I graduated from McMaster, and I want to stress how very, very religious Baptist it was. After that, I got a scholarship from the University of Chicago, and my majors at McMaster had been French and German, and I got the scholarship for German, so that settled it. And yeah, he was one of the students there, and he was nearly 6 years younger than I, and but he did everything very early. He graduated for everything earlier than anybody else, so we were in the same classes. And he was very shy, and only one day he said to me, "Do you ever drink coffee?" And that started it. We went and had some coffee together.
And did he have his parents in America as well?
Did he have his what?
Parents, like George's parents, did they emigrate from Europe as well?
His parents emigrated from Hamburg.
And what do you know what year that would have been?
It was either the same year or almost the same year. Now, it was very difficult for German Jews to be accepted in America. America was as anti-Semitic as any other place, and but George's father had a distant relative who was a lawyer on Wall Street, and he arranged for the family to be able to come over, and they also took George's younger sister into their house.
Can I interject something?
Yeah.
The story I remember is that he came on an exploratory trip by boat with a group of Jews from Hamburg, and he spent the better part of a day going through the phone book.
Yeah, that's
calling
right.
people.
His father had no idea of, whom to turn to, and he found that name. The last name was Mela, M-E-L-A, and so he decided maybe that's a relative, and it turned out to be one. So George's father wasn't that smart, but that was one smart thing he did.
And so you met George,
That's
and you continued on at the University of Chicago, or then when you graduated, where did you go from there?
And from there, we went. We got jobs in Chicago at one time. We both taught for a while. We did not have our PhDs yet, but then George, we were always interested in race relations and in the way blacks were treated in America. So when he heard of a job in Little Rock, we at Philander Smith College, which was, these black schools were all quite religious Christian. So we went there and we lived on the campus there. And the exciting thing there was that Jeremy was born.
What did your family think of that?
Well, my mother didn't think much of George in the first place. She for lots of reasons, because he didn't pay attention to how he was dressed, and he had a funny accent, and he was younger than I. There were I could spend all afternoon talking about, and you know, I found out a lot about slavery and about the time after slavery, which wasn't much better for them. And you know, we lived on the campuses. And well, then, but I was supposed to have my final exam for my PhD, and Jeremy was supposed to come a few weeks later. I went to Chicago, and by golly, guess what happened? I got went into labor, and I had to go to the hospital, and Jeremy was born. And my cousin had a pauper who often said very proper things, said, it could happen to anybody, but it wouldn't. And yeah, well, and the other two were born there too. And after that, I'm shortening it a little bit, we went to another black school in Louisiana called Dillard University, which I understand lately has been in the news quite a bit. But anyway, Dillard University was not as good for us as Orlando Smith in Little Rock because, well, the white people there were very anti-black and, you know, made things difficult, and they put on our mailbox, put an N in front of the name, and you know, no matter how often we got rid of it, it got there again.
Can I back you up, Mom?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the integration of Central High School and Dad and your involvement?
Yeah, but, well, that took place at our time, and George was very active in the NAACP. I, of course, became a member too, and yeah, he actually, who was the...
Daisy Bates?
No, Daisy Bates was one, she was one of the active low black people in town, but then there was the Justice of the Supreme Court.
What, Thurgood Marshall?
Yeah.
And Brown and Board of Education, I think you're talking about.
And, yeah, well, anyway, it was integrated. It wasn't easy because, you know, it wasn't easy for blacks to continue to go there, but they did. George also, one thing was he integrated, after that, we had a sabbatical and we decided to go to Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is the capital of Arkansas, and which was much more tolerant toward our kind of people. So we were there, and we, George and I, integrated the children's wading pool, which sounded like a big thing for us, and black kids could get in the water, and the Arkansas can get pretty hot. And, well,
And so did you have, you know, because of your activism, did you have much pushback from the local community? Or?
and I don't know, I think we were so preoccupied with what we were doing, and we were busy with our teaching, and you know, we had a lot of black friends who used to come to the house, and the children, we always made a point of the children having their birthday parties in a park with black children there. I have photographs somewhere too of all of us, you know, black and white together. Well, one sad thing is that I had an email from a Arkansas friend not too long ago. She died in the meantime, who said that Little Rock is as segregated as ever. And, yeah,
And can you talk a little bit about the FBI and the files that they had on George and maybe you as well? And you got them through the Freedom of Information, and what did they say?
I don't remember any details of it anymore, but of course, just like it sometimes, there was a lot of propaganda against people who were accused of supposedly being communists. So, we were accused of being Negro haters.
Nigger lovers.
Negro lovers. And,
Would you like a drink of water, Mama?
Yeah, sure.
You must have been one of the first white members of the NAACP.
I think so, yeah. And
And so, did you meet all the leaders at that time? Like, did you ever meet, like, Abernathy or Martin
it was-
Luther King or?
No, we didn't. We were aware of what was going on.
If I may interject,
We were-
when Dad was at Dillard, there were meetings at Dillard where Martin Luther King Jr. did participate.
Was
Came
what?
to, Martin Luther King came to the Dillard campus, and Dad was in meetings with him. It would have been, somewhere between 1957
Yeah.
and 1960.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's all I know about
Yeah.
that.
And so then, after that period of time, so now we're into the 1960s.
Well, George decided, we taught in Chicago for a while. George at Roosevelt University, which was on a much better level than those black ones. And I was at Loyola, which probably was one of the best that I've ever been to. Although I should say I had also taught at Tulane, but that was just temporary. But anyway, George felt, he was a scholar more than anything else, and he wanted to go to a better university, so he had two offers. One was Buffalo, and one was the Chicago branch of the University of Illinois. And we decided to go to Buffalo. A couple of reasons, which maybe one was that I didn't like such a big city as Chicago. All the distances, I'm a small town girl, and as close as possible to Bishop Dinans with 3,000 was just about right for me. So Buffalo was closer than that. And the other thing not to forget was that we had all the relatives across the border. So Buffalo was the logical place. And in those days, the relatives, not only relatives, but refugees who had come about the same time, used to get together a lot. I have pictures of those picnics where, all of the refugees if they didn't know each other before, they got to know each other at the picnics. And since then, we've been in Buffalo, and should I say that I'm glad that most of my descendants are in Canada. I think for many reasons it's just a much better place. Can you imagine a Trump there? No.
And you want to talk about the times, because you spend quite a bit of time, like half a year at times, in Germany at the university there.
Yeah, well, yeah, when we never had jobs in Germany, so we saved up money so that we could spend time in Germany, because George wanted to go to the German libraries, which were available in, well, various cities. Göttingen was one, Leipzig was another, and yeah, we loved it. We really felt very much at home there, and we made lots of friends, and yeah, the kids were with us a lot of the time. Ultimately, it was because of the children that we felt we should spend more time here. So back, yeah, I should say that George taught at UB, and I got a job at Canisius College, which is not as prestigious, but I felt that that was fine. With my teaching full-time and 3 kids, a college, a university that would not require a major publication every year was just fine with me. So it was okay. It was. I ran into some anti-Semitism there, but who doesn't? Where don't you find anti-Semitism?
So in terms of the grad students that that you have taught and that have come out from under under your stewardship, George and you, like, you've had an influence in many places around the world.
Well, George attracted a lot of German students who wanted to study with him, who spent a year, and I got to know a lot of them.
You,
We hit the phone.
Sorry, I was.
can you start again? You mean he attracted German students in Buffalo?
Yeah, George had a class every Monday night, and there were always about 20 or so students. Look, these chairs, I had almost 20 of them, all because I needed them for all those students. And late at night, I would come in and say tea or coffee, and I always had baked something for them. So that was my contribution to German scholarship mostly. Dan, on the bottom of that bookcase, there is something that the kids, it's a wooden thing, I don't know what you call it.
Gavel.
Oh, a gavel. That was for calling the seminar to order.
Yeah.
But they gave it to him.
They gave me this.
Coffee or tea, the Monday night Germans.
Yeah, see. Well,
But you also have a fair number of
I still hear
Asian.
from some of them.
But you had a lot of Asian students as well, right? Asian PhD students?
Yeah, we had, that's right, we had most more Chinese than anything else, and one of the Chinese students by the name of Jin Jia Wang, he still sends me a package with delicacies every year.
So, but the Chinese students, this is at a time of Mao and everything else, were they able to, did they study here or did they go back home? Or
They tried, if at all possible, to stay, but some went back, some went to various places in the world. But yeah, I was in touch with quite a number of them. I still hear from an East German one who has sympathies for the communists. He just sent me the publication, the journal that he publishes about last week. So here I hear from them, and then I hear from another one. You see, I think they were influenced by George to think about social problems. So one of them, by the first name Heinrich, I'm a lot in touch with him, and he organized a group called Brückenbauen, which is building bridges. And what he does is try to build bridges between different races or different nationalities. So, and he also worked on George's and my biography, so he collected a lot of information about us. And
Can you talk about, some of the awards and recognition you've had from the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia and your association with some of the people after Prague Spring and that type of thing?
well, they've been celebrating my birthdays, and last year there was the biggest celebration, I guess, and by then, Zoom didn't always exist, but it existed last year, so I was in touch with a lot of the people there and also people from elsewhere, some Jewish and some not Jewish who had heard about me, the Zoom wasn't that successful because of my hearing, but there was writing that I could see what they were saying, but what I heard was not always the same as what I saw. I mean, Zoom it helps a lot of people, but I saw people whom I had known, many decades ago, and after a while it occurred to me, oh, that white-haired man, that's the guy I used to know.
I was looking, Mama, you have a crystal ball that was engraved. It was presented to you by the foreign ministry, I think of Czechoslovakia, because it was before, but it was for sort of an award that they give to people, Czechs, who have contributed to Czech arts and culture from abroad.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't find it. I was looking around for it, a crystal ball that's usually somewhere.
Yeah, I wonder where it is.
Oh well.
I have a great helper, but she sometimes puts things, she tries to make order among my things.
Which is a job.
Oh, look, there it is.
No.
See,
And so, were you asked at one time to help participate in the Czech government?
oh, no. Oh, no. But I started going back there in the 60s, late 60s actually. And for a long time I used to go all the time, and I got to know, I made some very, very good friends there.
Do you remember your impressions on your first trip back? The first time you went back?
And what year would have that been?
66, I think.
And do you remember what your impressions were then?
No, I not only went to Prague, I also went to my area, of course. I went to the cemeteries that I had known, and you shouldn't be surprised that things look different after decades,
Yeah.
And there was a very nice man who was sort of an amateur historian, and he asked me a lot of questions, and then he wrote a book. He made mistakes in it, he misunderstood some things, but he was a great guy, and I had lots of very nice experiences. For instance, there was somebody whom I met actually, I think in Domažlice, who said, when you go to Prague, you should look up my mother-in-law. And I looked her up, and she had an apartment on Národní, sort of one of the main streets, and the apartment consisted of one room, kitchen at the one end and 2 beds at the other end. She said, I have so much space, don't look for a place to stay, you stay with me. So I stayed with her every time I came to Prague. It was great, we were good friends. She wrote me by pencil a Czech cookbook, which I still have, except most Americans don't want those things. But yeah, it was great. And you know what happened about maybe a month ago, a little more than a month ago, I got an email from Pavla Yechova. And she said, don't you remember I'm Božeda's daughter-in-law? And so she and her husband were in Hawaii, and they said, what can I do for you? And they sent me the most wonderful Hawaiian chocolates with nuts in them, which too bad don't have any left anymore. They were too good to save, because the old lady had died, but now I'm in touch with the daughter-in-law. And I have another more or less new Czech friend, except it's been already some years. I had read an article, I forgot what it was about, that interested me. So I wrote the letter to the editor and told him what I thought. And the editor didn't reply to me, but his wife did. And she's been writing me ever since. And last week she said, would you like me to subscribe for you to a Czech women's magazine? And I said, okay, but so far it hasn't come yet.
I would like to know.
Pardon?
I would like to know your thoughts on anti-racism and anti-Semitism today, as you've seen it evolve over the last many decades.
Yeah, well, you know, when we were in Little Rock, we both thought, I guess, that our children are seeing the tail end of racism, and, you know, it'll be a vague memory to them when they grow up. Well, that didn't happen. And when we first came to Buffalo, I think what I noticed the most was, you'll be surprised, anti-German feelings. You know, people, a German friend, a historian, subscribed to a German weekly for me, which it's wonderful. It is about 70 or 80 pages, and by the time I get done, the next issue comes. So that's where I get my present wisdom from. And about the people here in the building, especially the Jews, when they see me with a German paper, they're shocked, and they'll say, "Don't you know what they did?" You know. And well, one reason I wish that this could come out in English is that the 1/3 of it, which is my father's correspondence with his German friends of his young days. They stayed friends until they were middle-aged. That, you know, there was just no question that they were close to each other. And I stayed in touch with their son, who was a doctor, and who organized a group called Society for German-Czech Friendship. And so, yeah, that continued. I mean, he died, some other people continued. I don't even know what's happening to it now, but at least
So,
during much of my lifetime it did.
Mom, in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War,
During what?
in the immediate aftermath of the war, the Second World War,
Yeah,
your dad continued to send aid and visit, and he also went to visit people
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in
well,
Bohemia and Germany, did
yeah,
he not?
well, look, that brings me back when we were still home. Of course, we had no cash, and to be able to leave, my father went to the bank, and the manager was his best friend, and he let him have all the money that we had there, which got him into a lot of hot water with the Nazis. But he had a bad stomach. I don't know what was the matter with his stomach. He was always sick from that. And of course, he and his family were expelled, just like most Germans were expelled, regardless of what their past was. One thing that saved them from being even jailed by the Nazis was that it just so happened that a German friend of mine, a young girl, had watched this transaction with the money with my father. So, but they ended up in Germany and they were starving. Really, those people who were expelled with nothing.
This is after the war, after the Czechs
Wait a minute,
expelled all of the Germans.
Yeah, so my father used to send them care packages from Canada. But not only that, but my grandmother, who was friends with the people in the neighborhood, remembered the baker down the street. I still remember his name. We used to go there, and she arranged for that baker to send these people bread and flour and potatoes and whatever, because my father and grandmother paid them for it, but they more or less kept this family alive.
Mhm.
That was this manager with his wife and 3 children.
So, do you want to comment on, because you're obviously right up on all the news, do you want to comment on the current state of affairs in the world, what's going on in Israel, and your thoughts for the future?
Well, I am unfortunately not optimistic about the future. I think things look scarier in Israel than they have in a long time. I somehow wish Israel would make things more, sort of come to some kind of an agreement with the Palestinians, because in my young days, what I used to hear was that the Zionists pay these people plenty of money, so now it's our land, and but I guess the Palestinians came to realize that in the long run their situation was worse than it was that of the Jews who lived in kibbutzim and who were much more knowledgeable and much better trained and so on. So I think, but I'm less optimistic than ever. What do you think?
Yeah, well, between what's going on in Ukraine, in my opinion, the rising power of China, and that there's a lot of things that are not looking very promising right now.
Look, yeah, I mean, Putin, I think there have been some people who were just crazy evil in this world that we've experienced, and Hitler was one, and maybe you won't expect this comparison, but Putin isn't too far from it, and I think that I wish never no Netanyahu. I mean, he's no Hitler, but he's very right wing. He's very much like the awful right. I mean, the Jews had expected that this would be one place where they would be safe, finally, after all these thousands of years.
Any other questions people want?
Yeah, just maybe one question going way back. When you came to Canada as a young girl,
Yeah.
I remember Mother saying to her as a young girl, it was a big adventure. She didn't realize the seriousness of what was going on in the world. And I just wondered if you had similar feelings.
Yeah. Well, yeah, very, very much so. But one very important thing was that we had good, secure families. And one thing I think I should have mentioned from the beginning was the Compagnie Abilis and Papa. You know what that was?
Yeah.
Yes.
The two Abilis brothers and two Papa brothers who were actually also cousins. They could count on each other. There was no such thing as, so we felt totally safe, and I could understand that the company fell apart in Canada, but I was very sorry that they did.
Yeah.
And it was a big shock to me when bad relations came about, among close relatives. The scholarship that I did, the writing that I did, I call it always extended Mishpochologie. It starts out with, we belong together.
Yeah.
I just have one question, Wilma. I'll try to keep my voice up. So I understood back in the Little Rock days that you and George, or George by himself, I don't know, actually sued to desegregate the schools in Little Rock. Is that right?
Yeah. And actually, but Thurgood Marshall was actually against it. He thought, we should go easy and not disturb things. But the Little Rock NAACP made its own decisions. And yeah.
And Dad was the chair of that, the chair of the education committee that pursued that. And I remember the story that fundraising was done and that you and Dad raised contributions.
Oh yeah.
From Canada.
That goes without saying. We were always collecting money.
But including from
yeah.
Mishpocha and Canada.
Wait a minute, there's something very important that I'm sorry, I'll probably remember things when you're gone. To launch the Little Rock suit, you had to have money, and the money was just a few $100s. And how did we get the money? I wrote to the relatives in Canada, and I got all of, I think, $400, which was enough to start the lawsuit. And I don't remember anymore, but I think Frank Seeger and Frank Loewith contributed. It was, the ones who had money. It surely wasn't the farmers.
And for the benefit of the tape, that led to the desegregation of Central High School,
Yeah.
which eventually required President Eisenhower to send in the National Guard to push aside the governor and so on.
Yeah.
Wilma, could you also speak about how you were and
Yeah,
Georg counsel?
you should come closer.
So, how you and Georg were counseling young men, especially black men, for not being drafted for Vietnam. That's another very important
that too.
chapter.
Yeah, that was just, I should say, another detail. Because we were lucky. Most of our people did not have to serve in any army because they were needed on the farms, right?
Yeah. So,
Anything else? Well, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and enlightening us with some details that
Yeah.
we did not know about. And
Yeah.
it's important that we save this oral history because you have
Yeah.
accomplished so much in so many fields.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
those of us that are directly related are always extremely proud of you and your late husband and what you've done.
Thank you very much. I just feel very badly that at this point I'm not being able to do a damn thing.